Thanks for downloading this episode of the Resilient Advisor Podcast. My name is Jay Coulter, and joining me today is compliance expert Ivan Barreto. Ivan is the managing director and founder of a company called RIA Compliance Concepts, and he's based in Austin, Texas. And today we're going to talk about an issue that is going to get larger and larger as the baby boomers start to age, and that is senior vulnerability and financial exploitation of elders. Ivan, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jay. I appreciate you taking the time to have me on.
Well, I think you have some great content for financial advisors listening to this podcast. Let's get started. Let's define senior vulnerability and financial exploitation.
Well, senior vulnerability basically is when you have an elderly client, they're on the verge of basically diminished mental capacity. So that basically leaves them vulnerable to being taken advantage of by friends, family, caregivers, or whatnot. Financial exploitation basically leads into that, where if you have an elderly client that's going downhill, the caregivers or family members or whatnot take advantage of them and basically, use it as a ploy to get money from the client or transfer assets from the elderly client.
Well, I have to imagine with your experience as a compliance expert working with RIAs, you've seen some of the horror stories. Can you give us an idea of some of the red flags advisors should be aware of so that they can identify somebody if they're in that vulnerable position?
Yeah, of course. Obviously, if you have an elderly client, if you see that they're having difficulty with simple math problems, understanding important aspects of their financial account or investment account, they're having difficulty, managing their checkbook, or they have general confusion over basic financial terms. Those are kind of some of the warning signs. Also, if, the client, has memory loss or difficulty speaking and communicating to you, to the advisor, is disoriented around their surroundings and social settings, and so forth, that's pretty much some good warning signs to be aware of when you're working with elderly clients.
So, Ivan, that's, makes sense. We advisors learn that as they go through their licensing exam. What are some other examples where an advisor might not have been trained on how to identify the vulnerability from some real life examples that you've seen?
I mean, well, obviously there's in the recent news over the past couple months, you've seen Stan Lee, the famed comic book creator. There's been a wide array of stories of how he's been taken advantage of in a vulnerable state, in which a member of his family's management team, I guess, took hold of his power of attorney and became power of attorney on his account, and then they basically wreaked havoc on some of his assets. In that case, I believe, Mr. Lee lost, he lost his wife, or his wife had passed away, and he was in a very vulnerable state when this all transpired. So, some of the things that, as far as warning signals, other warning signals are, if client starts getting interested in, get rich quick schemes, and, they're very anxious about their personal wealth. Those are some of the other warning signals that, financial advisors should be aware of.
So Stan Lee, the comic book creator, got taken advantage of?
Yeah, it's a crazy story. If you Google and look at his information, it got so bad to the point where I think the manager that took over general power of attorney had hired a nurse to pull blood samples from him to sell his blood to comic book fans.
Oh.
So it's it's pretty crazy. And that incident where, the past couple months when that was projected out or, reported on, brought, this issue to light where most people, are not, it takes like a high profile case like that to kind of bring this issue to light.
Okay. Well, hey, let's hang some meat on this. Let's say you're Stan Lee's financial advisor and you start to see some of this happening. What does the financial advisor need to do, and what is their liability?
Well, I mean, there's been recent laws that have passed through pretty much most of the states that in some states like Texas, you, as a financial professional, you are you're deemed a mandatory reporter, which basically means if you suspect this is going on, you are required to report this to the appropriate regulatory authority for, senior aging and disability services, or your state regulator, or even in some cases, local law enforcement, to report this information if someone's being taken advantage of. Other things that they're able to do in some states like Texas, they have the ability to not process transaction requests from the elderly client while an investigation is taking place. And in some cases, they have between 10 to 15 days to hold, putting through a transaction request from the elderly client, so they can make sure that the proper authorities are investigating this situation, a client being taken advantage of.
So, Ivan, I would have to think that as the pool of aging baby boomers grows, the scamsters and schemes will get more and more creative. Tell me, what type of scams are you seeing today that maybe an advisor hasn't thought of to be on the lookout for?
I mean, the most common ones that you're going to come across are contacted by phone. Like, elderly clients are contacted by phone, with get rich quick schemes or IRS schemes, in which, people fraudulently pretend that they're the IRS and that they're due a payment and or they're owed a payment, and the elderly client is unaware of it because of their diminished capacity, and they cut a check or something, or give their credit card information over the phone. Other scenarios are, common ones, you get stuff through the email where a client is being contacted via email by a financial professional, about a potential investment idea or whatnot, and they don't do their due diligence and just dive right in. Some even play to the extent where, some fraudulent people will pretend to be a charity and solicit funding for their charity. So there's a lot of ways that people can take advantage of elderly clients, and in various forms or fashion, but most of them come through email or phone conversations on the telephone.
So, Ivan, on the Resilient Advisor podcast, I bring on guests from all parts of the industry, from portfolio construction, investment management, marketing, even blockchain. And when compliance folks come on, I know from folks that have listened to episodes with former folks in your space, if they make it this far into the podcast, it's a topic that's important and timely to them today. What could you tell financial advisors that are listening right now because they're concerned about the potential risks in their practice, what they need to do today to protect themselves and their clients?
Well, one of the main things is to work with the clients to get a what is called a trusted contact person. At some point or another, when a financial advisor or financial professional is working with an elderly client, they have to determine a specific age point in which they would want to talk about determining who a trusted contact person should be in case they start going downhill. that's one of the main things you should look at. But another thing is making sure you have policies and procedures in place and training in place for not only for financial professionals, but their personnel or staff that help them with the ongoing operations of the business, that they have some form of training to understand and spot any red flags or potential financial exploitation scenarios with their elderly clients that they work with, and then having the proper policies and procedures in place to report that information if necessary to the proper authorities.
Okay, so to summarize, a contact for their senior clients where they think there might be a potentially challenging situation where they might need somebody to refer to, having internal policies and training on how to identify and address the issues, and then lastly, knowing where to go within your state to address the issue with the proper authorities. Is that fair?
That is fair.
Awesome. Ivan, how could listeners find out more about you and the services that you offer at RIA Compliance Concepts?
The best way to learn more about our services is to go to our website at www.riacc.io. And basically that has a plethora of information about my team and our services. And we also post content, compliance-related content on a regular basis on our blog, on our website. They can also reach us via our LinkedIn profile, company profile page for the same kind of compliance content that we post on our website.
Excellent. I will have links to all of that in the show notes. Ivan, thanks so much for coming on the show.
No, thank you, Jay. I appreciate it. I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on.